Our first technique in the kick counter series is the round kick catch to inside trip, followed by an ankle lock. The first thing I need to make sure of is that I circle away from Mike's kick, as well as buffer the impact with my non-catching hand. This should take some sting off of the kick. Next, I post on his near shoulder and bring my foot heel to heel to do the trip. At this point, it's important that I bump my shin into his knee pit. If I lose control of that free leg, he can lace through my legs and start his counterattack. I slide my wrist all the way back until it hits his heel, bring my shoulder back, pin my elbow to my ribs, and arch until I get his hips off the mat. Keeping that pressure on his ankle that's causing his knee to bend and his hips to rise, I sit down and swing my outside leg over. Keeping everything tight, it should only take a slight bridge to finish the ankle lock and get the tap. Next, we have a kick catch to dynamic ankle lock. The key to this technique is to make sure you're pulling your opponent backwards as you sit down. This will stretch him out and unweight his free leg, making it easier to kick up. Notice how I don't sit on top of my leg, but make sure they're both free, so that once he's up in the air, my other leg can come over. Once he hits the mat, I turn my hips towards his free leg, securing dominant leg control. Making sure my wrist is against his heel, I roll my shoulder back, pin my elbow down, and bridge to finish the submission. This is a quick takedown you can use when you end up catching a kick with an underhook as opposed to an overhook. Be sure to circle away from the kick and keep your free hand up to avoid eating a foot in the face. Once you have the kick resting in your arm, take a big backward cross step as you would with any kick-up throw. Overhook your opponent's leg with your free hand and rotate hard away from him, looking at the mat behind you. Simultaneously, kick your leg up high, clipping him in the knee or the thigh. This is a foot sweep against a push kick catch. As the push kick comes in, close your hands over the top and bottom of the foot, making sure to step back to take some heat off the kick. Pull his foot in front of your chest as you step forward towards his closed side, bringing your hand in front of his chest. Pull up on his ankle to unweight his free leg as you sweep. At the same time, push him down with your free hand. As you sit to apply the heel hook, make sure you stomp on his free leg to avoid him spinning out of the submission. After you catch the push kick, drag the leg to the outside armpit. Lift the foot high as you turn into them and drop to your knees. Underhook the calf and put both hands on the top of the foot. Pull the foot hard into your stomach as you bring your head down towards the mat to finish the throw. My opponent throws a cross hook combination. After blocking or parrying the cross, I bring my cover up to protect me from the hook. At the same time, I move in and jam my front hand across his collar. As I swim in for an overhook, I push on his head to create a dominant angle. At this point, I can throw knee strikes. Until I'm ready to make my sudden but inevitable dynamic entry. The victor roll is essentially a forward roll with your opponent. I change my overhook grip to be a deep grip in his far armpit. Holding onto his armpit tightly, I jump up in the air and shoot both my legs back. One leg through his legs and one leg to the outside. This next part requires a little bit of bravery. Throw your head downward towards his legs. Don't roll sideways, but roll forwards, head over heels. Pull down tightly with your top grip to help him roll with you. Reach your free hand between his leg and your leg, as deep as you can, until you can hook his leg with the crook of your elbow. Your aim should be able to get your head through his legs. If you do this correctly, he should roll with you. With your arm that is hooked behind his ankle, grab the back of your head. Stomp on the ground and extend your hips to finish the knee bar. The rolling ankle lace is an alternative attack to the victor roll. The entrance is essentially the same, except the rolling angle is sideways instead of forward. With my free hand, I reach for the farthest leg as I pull him down and force him to roll. Once we hit the mat, I let go of his upper body. I let his far foot fall into my armpit and reach under his near foot. I then gable grip my hands and pull my hands towards my face to finish the submission. It's important that our bodies are on one line, and not side by side as they were with the victor roll. You can also hook your outside foot over to make it more secure. Oftentimes when you put this type of angled pressure on your opponent, he does his best to square back up to you and raise his level. This gives you a good opportunity to drop your own level and throw him with a fireman's carry. As my opponent turns into me, I turn into him, dropping my level and bringing my hip to the mat. My head ducks under his armpit as my arm readjusts to grab a hold of his tricep. My free hand goes through his legs and wraps around his shin. I pull down hard on his tricep, letting him trip over my leg and lifting his leg with my hand. I let my head hit the mat and guide him over me. The lateral drop is an alternative throw to the fireman's carry. As your opponent pressures into you, slide your hips in so that your knees are on either side of his far leg. Simultaneously, swim your far arm in for an underhook. Bend your knees forward and arch your hips up as you bring your shoulders backward toward the mat. Do not try to lift your opponent. Use his pressure against him. Fall underneath him and arch your head to the mat to guide him over you. Both the lateral and the fireman's carry have more to do with getting out of your opponent's way than lifting them up. Because of this, it's best not to attempt these techniques unless your opponent is giving you a lot of pressure. We're going to work our way into an underhook from a hook-cross combination. I'm going to bring my cover up and block the hook as usual. Next, I will drop my lead hand on top of the cross and push it down as I swim for an underhook. My backhand comes in and jams across the collar. At this point, I could reach my hand over and grab my wrist to tie in a quarter Nelson. I can follow it up with some knee strikes. The flying head scissor is about as awesome as it sounds. After a couple of knee strikes, your opponent should be in a good position. Using the back of their head as a lifting point, jump up in the air. Throw your outside leg over on top so the back of your thigh lands on top of their head. Your near leg should go under their arm if possible. Keeping a tight grip on your underhook, brace your fall with your now free hand. Squeeze your knees tight and roll hard on your ribs away from them to roll them over. When you have an underhook on someone, there's always a risk that they can move to head and arm and try and throw you. Because of this, the back arch is an important technique to have in your arsenal. As my opponent circles away from me and puts their hips in place, I take a step outward. I immediately drive my knees forward and bring my butt closer to the mat. Now, you might want to learn this one on a crash pad because it can be pretty scary at first. Thrust your hips up towards the sky as you arch back towards the mat behind you. Your head should be protected by resting on his shoulder, and your opponent best tuck his chin. Once you've hit the mat, heist your hips to cover. We're going to start this technique with knee strikes from the tie clinch. Next, I'm going to turn my hips away from my opponent and release one of the collar ties. I'm going to hop one leg through his legs and one leg far back behind his legs. This will feel unstable and make you want to fall forward. You want to use that momentum to dive into a forward roll, bringing your head through his legs and tugging down on his head to make him roll with you. Your free hand reaches between your leg and his leg until your elbow can wrap around the ankle. As you're rolling, put your hand behind your head to secure the knee lock. Once you've both rolled through, thrust your hips upward to finish the submission. The scissor leg takedown is one of my favorite takedowns, but it's also one of the most dangerous. This technique needs to be practiced very carefully with a willing and experienced training partner. Even if you think you have this technique down pat, you should only do this technique in training with someone who's aware of the technique, knows how to fall from the technique, and knows you're going to try it. I recommend mastering the victor roll first, as it is interchangeable with the scissor and a lot safer to do for your training partner. We're going to start this technique off with a couple of knee strikes from the tie clinch. Next, I'm going to turn my hips away from my opponent as I let go with one of my grips. Holding on tight to the collar tie, I'm going to jump in the air and shoot one of my legs through his legs and one of my legs behind him, landing on my posted hand to keep myself from falling to the floor. This part is crucial for your opponent's safety. If you fall directly to your hip, you can cause a serious knee injury to him. Now, I'm going to scissor my legs and roll hard into him as I pull down on the collar tie. My lower back hits the mat. This is the first part of my body to hit the mat besides my hand. I'm going to continue to roll into him until my hip nearest him is resting on the mat and his legs are elevated. I now swim my posting hand around his toes and up underneath his heel for the heel hook. I gable grip with my posting hand on top. At this point, I bring my bottom leg up and stop on his leg to avoid him rolling out of the heel hook. This sliding leg control entrance is one of my favorites, and it's also one of the easiest dynamic entries to learn. When Mike improves his position by pummeling in to get his own tie clinch, I have to act quickly before he starts throwing his knee strikes. While he's still in the process of posturing up, I immediately drop my level, hop my feet underneath him, and bring one of my knees to my chest. That same side hand remains clenched on his neck. My free hand now grabs a hold of his leg. As I rock onto my back, I pull him down with my collar tie hand and pull his leg into my armpit. Both my legs go through his legs as my knee stays compressed to my chest. As he falls, I roll onto my side closest to my clinching hand, throw my outside leg over, and make sure that my knee is still in between me and him. At this point, I can apply the heel hook as usual. This sliding heel hook can also be done if your opponent catches your knee strike. Once he has a hold of your leg, make sure your knee is tight to his chest and your foot is between his legs. Keep the same side collar tie as the knee that he has caught and let go with the other hand. While holding tight to that collar tie, jump your free leg deep in between his legs as possible. Grab a hold of his free leg as you sling him down to the mat. Swing your top leg over and finish the heel hook as normal. For this flying triangle, I'm going to use a collar tie and wrist control. Keeping his wrist low, I'm going to use the collar tie to help propel me as I jump as high as I can and swing my leg over his arm. Obviously, I'm going to have to let go of the wrist in mid-jump, otherwise I'll stop my leg from coming over. My other leg swings up and bumps into his far arm. Holding on tight with the collar tie and biting down on his neck with my leg, I underhook under his leg with my free arm as I start to descend. Once we hit the mat, I should be at a 90-degree angle to my opponent. I'm going to bring my back knee towards my face and bump into his ear as I triangle my legs. Then I will grab my shin, squeeze my thighs, and press my hips up to finish the submission. You can't always expect to finish immediately after attempting a flying triangle. More often, you'll hit the ground in proper triangle position, but their head will be postured and you won't have their arm entirely across your body. Mike assumes a quick defensive position where his head is postured and his forearm is braced against my stomach. Keeping my legs closed tight, I reach up and pull down on the top of his head to break down his posture. Still squeezing my knees together, I post my foot on his hip and angle my hips out slightly. Keeping control of his head, and having my thighs still squeezing together, I bring my knee towards my face. This pushes his arm more across my body. Even if I have control of his head, if I open my legs too wide at this point, he can get his arm out. If this is done correctly, the top of my thigh should have forced his elbow more across my body. Next, I'm going to shoot my leg straight up towards the sky. I will rotate my knee to face his ear, making sure the top of my thigh is touching the side of his head. I now bend my knee and bring my calf down on top of my other shin, pinching my knees together. It's important that I maintain that knee facing my opponent's ear. Next, I'm going to reach my arm behind my own knee and behind his head and S-grip my hands together. I will bite down with my legs as I lift my hips and pull my arms in to finish the submission. The guillotine is another choke that can be done from collar tie and wrist control. I'm going to use my collar tie to force his head under the arm that had control of his wrist. Simultaneously, I will bring my hand up to cup his chin. The base of my thumb will be right against his neck. Next, I'm going to grab the fat of my hand. I will start leaning over his head until my choking arm's elbow points towards the ground. With the back of my hand resting against his body, I'm going to let my elbow drop over his shoulder. Using that as a fulcrum, I'm going to push my elbow down, forcing my hand into my chest and my wrist into his throat. If done correctly, this should be a very quick tap. I want to make sure that my body weight is on the crown of his head and his neck is exposed. If I lean over his body, he'll easily be able to posture up and potentially take me down. If in the middle of this submission he grabs my wrist to defend, I will continue driving my elbow over his shoulder until I force him to the mat and finish the submission with him on his back. This is a rolling shoulder lock from a caught knee strike if you have a collar tie and wrist control. I throw knee strikes at my opponent with the knee on the same side as my collar tie. After he catches a knee, I release the collar tie and reach around his arm to tie in a figure 4 grip. I hop my standing foot in between his legs as I bring my butt towards the ground. Using my shin that's in between his legs and my figure 4 grip, I launch him over me. I kick over and back roll into side control. During the roll, I switch my thumb of my gripping hand so that it is on top of his arm. Once in side control, I switch my hips under his free arm, lift his elbow, and slide his wrist underneath to finish the submission. This is a reverse Victor roll against someone who's ducked under your arm. The first thing I need to do is post the hand closest to the leg I want to attack to avoid being picked up. On that same side, bring your foot far back behind his leg to the outside. This will allow you to roll deeper. Next, lift your other leg and dive your free hand through his legs. Your head should end up on the outside of his leg, and your arm wrapped elbow deep around his ankle. Kick your legs into him to force him to roll with you. Once he's on the mat, use your free hand to grab his heel, pinch your knees together, and extend your hips to finish the submission. Flying arm bars are awesome, and there's good reason they're the definitive dynamic entry. As difficult as this technique looks, it's an extremely practical tool to have in your arsenal. Mike and I are in a standard collar tie clinch, but he's holding a little bit too tightly to my neck. These are the perfect conditions for a flying arm bar. The tighter he's holding onto you, the more likely he'll stay connected during this technique. I'm attacking the arm that's holding onto my neck. I'm going to jump that same side leg close to him and to the outside of his body. Using that firmly planted foot to propel myself, and my grip on his collar tie, I'm going to jump up in the air, and sling my opposite leg up into his armpit. My other leg follows and comes wide as to avoid kicking him in the head. As I descend, I want to fall in between his legs, with my hips perpendicular to his. I never let go of the collar tie, as it ensured that he came down with me. Next, I swing my outside leg over, and use it to force him to the mat. To finish, I double up my grip on the arm, pull my heels in, pinch my knees, and lift my hips up to finish the arm bar. This technique can also be done off of a caught knee strike. The dynamic shot is very similar to a standard double leg. One key difference is that I'm not trying to knock him over, but instead get his weight on the other foot so I can more easily attack the ankle that I grab. I'm going to start my shot off normally, lowering my level, keeping my head up, and driving my knee in between his legs. I impact him with my shoulder to drive his weight onto his heels. Here's where I'm going to start doing things differently. My hand will not block his knee, but instead float next to his hip. I will continue to drive as I scoop up his leg. Now pressuring with my head to put his weight on his free leg, I will swing my back leg up. As I start to stand, I will bring his ankle into my armpit and then suddenly drop back. My posted leg swings around and my other leg clips him in the back of the knee. I will scissor his hip with my top leg as I kick him up in the air. Once he's on the mat, I adjust to finish with an ankle lock. The inverted shot was made famous by Masakazu and Minari, but variations of it have been used with a lot of success by Megumi Fujii and some other Sambo practitioners in MMA. To start this off, I want to stand mirrored to my opponent. If I'm attacking his left leg, I'm going to make first contact with my right hand. I lower my level and turn inward towards my back. Then I hook his calf with my hand, thumb down. My feet kick up as if I was going to roll backward, but I'm not going to for this variation. Instead, I'm going to use my hand to pull my head and free arm underneath my arm. My right leg stays in front as my left leg goes behind. Keeping my hips elevated, I continue the spinning motion until my knee clips him in the back of his leg. If you look carefully during the motion, you'll see I'm not actually doing a back roll, but spinning on my back with my hips elevated. I'll finish this move off with an inverted heel hook. The victor roll against a single leg can be done in two variations. The first is a standard forward roll that can end in a knee bar. The second is more of a spin that I like to call a Rick roll. This usually ends in a heel hook. To start off, Mike picks up a single leg with his head on the inside. I'm going to allow him to bring my leg up in between his legs. If he's attacked my left leg, I'm going to post my right hand on the mat. I hop my standing foot behind him and dive my free hand through his legs. As I finish the roll, I kick both my feet through to knock him over. Once he's on the ground, I finish with a knee bar. In the Rick roll variation, I'm going to overhook his leg instead of underhook his leg as I dive. Once my back makes contact with the ground, instead of rolling, I'm going to spin inward. I will tie up an outside leg triangle on his leg and finish with a heel hook. As cool as this might look, it's not actually that secure of a leg lock, but we'll get into that later on the leg control section of the DVD. The guillotine is a great defense against a double leg takedown if someone keeps their head too low when shooting. As Mike shoots in, I step back and cup his chin with my hand. Just as before, I'm going to grab the fat of my hand and lean over his head as I drop my elbow over his back. It is especially important that I lean over his head in this instance, as it stops him from cutting the angle and driving me down to the ground with his double leg. For more details on finishing this choke, look for the previous chapter on doing guillotines from a collar tie. The flying triangle is a really cool counter against someone shooting a head on the inside single. As Mike snags my leg and tries to bring it up to the inside, I work my shin to the outside of his thigh, as you would with a normal single leg defense. If he is committed to the single leg, he has both his hands tied around one leg. These are the conditions I need for a flying triangle. I'm going to post my hand on the back of his head to give me leverage as I push myself way up in the air and fling my free leg around his shoulder. Keeping one hand on his neck to slow my descent, I use my other hand to underhook his leg. This helps me complete the angle I need to finish the submission. Once I hit the mat, I bump my thigh into his tricep and my knee into his ear, and tie in the triangle as demonstrated before. A scissor leg takedown against the treetop finish from a single leg is actually one of the easiest scissor legs to learn. Because your opponent is lifting your leg extremely high, it gives you more airtime to learn the technique. In fact, I recommend people learning the scissor from this position before trying it aggressively. After Mike picks a single leg, he underhooks my leg with both his arms. Before he can trip me, I grab a hold of his neck and drop to a posted hand. Simultaneously, I bring my free leg behind his legs. I punch that knee in between his legs, forcing my thigh into his knee pit. Because he's holding onto my leg, I cannot finish in a fantastic leg control position, but I can still tie on a heel hook, hopefully faster than he can escape or counter. The scissor can also be done from a caught push kick, before he hits you with a foot sweep. This is a sliding leg lock entry from a caught round kick. This is pretty slick, but it requires sort of a scramble when you hit the mat to avoid being in a neutral position. But even if you do get stuck in a leg lock battle, it's better off than where you were before. Mike and I start off in mirrored stances where we have the opposite hand forward. I throw my back leg round kick. He circles out and catches it with his back arm. I immediately grab his head with the same side arm that he has my leg on. I jump and slide my free leg deep between his legs as I overhook his leg with my free arm. As I sling him towards the mat, hopefully he lets go of my leg to avoid smashing his face into the mat. I quickly bury that foot behind his free leg's knee pit. I can attempt to finish my opponent with a heel hook, but because he falls at such an extreme angle, it might be easier to finish with a toe hold. If our stances are not mirrored, he might catch my round kick with his lead hand. In this case, it'll be very difficult to slide for his far leg. So I'm going to use that same spinning rickroll maneuver we used before to attack his near leg. Once he catches my leg, I'm going to immediately turn and post my backhand. Keeping my hips elevated, I'm going to dive my free hand and my head in between his leg and my posted hand. I'm going to grab a hold of his calf as I twist him down towards the mat. The speed and angle of which I'm spinning should rip my foot out of his grasp. I could quickly cross my legs and finish a heel hook out of position, or I could take a moment to put my foot in the back of his knee pit and have more secure leg control. A sitting armbar against a caught kick is a really good way to learn this type of movement before you learn a flying armbar. After Mike catches my kick, he puts his hand on my shoulder to push me over his foot. I'm going to immediately grab his neck and the arm he's posted on me. After he puts his foot in to trip me, I allow myself to fall and turn my head towards his legs. Being sure to hold tight to the collar tie so that he descends with me, I swing my free leg over his head and bite down to finish the armbar. Our first lesson on leg control is going to be how to achieve it from in your opponent's guard. To start my guard break, I'm going to place my hands on his hips. I will use my weight to force his hips to the mat as I place one knee in his tailbone. Keeping downward pressure with my hands, I will shoot my other leg back and open my hips to force his legs open. Now that I have one of his feet shelved on my thigh, I'm going to lace my arm around his calf and put the back of my hand against his thigh. I will now come to a high squat, punching my other leg in between his legs. After grabbing his free ankle, I will slide my arm up so I'm overhooked around his other ankle. Holding tightly to both legs, I will sit down. As I do, I rock back and elevate his free leg with my shin. Keeping his free leg elevated, I will lace my outside leg over the leg I'm attacking and under his free leg's knee pit. As I rock to my side, keeping the leg I'm attacking on the high side, I want to make sure that my overhooking top leg ends up on top of my other ankle and closest to his knee pit. This position I would refer to as strong leg control. Notice that I have control of both his legs, something that I consider very important in leg control, and both my feet are buried safely under his free leg's knee pit. This is one of the strongest leg control positions I can be in. It allows me to easily attack with the heel hook, toe hold, or ankle lock, and to flow into other leg lock positions as necessary. The straight ankle lock is a very important technique. Though it's probably one of the more difficult leg locks to perform under pressure, it allows you to have the most control over your opponent. Without having a strong straight ankle lock to threaten your opponent, you're going to have a hard time keeping them under control. The first thing I have to do is get my wrist in the right place. I'm going to bend my opponent's legs slightly forward as I strip my hips away. I then pinch my knees slightly behind my opponent's knee to keep his leg bent. Now that my body is out of the way of my hand, I keep my head forward as I move my wrist back to touch his heel. Laying on the tricep of my low arm, and using my thumb as a guide, I grab the fat of my hand. At this point, I bring my hips back in to control his leg. Now, keeping my hand high in my chest, I rock my shoulder back and out of my peripheral as I drop my elbow down to my hip. Keeping my hand high in my chest, my chin tucked, and my arm tight, I extend my hips to finish the submission. A common defense for the straight ankle lock is to stiffen the knee. That's usually when we move into the heel hook attack. Mike stiffens his leg before I can adjust to get the ankle lock. Keeping my knees tight, I'm going to pull my hand out. In a big sweeping motion, I'm going to reach my arm around behind me, pushing his toes down with my armpit. Keeping that pressure and my elbow pointed down, I'm going to bring my thumb towards my face, hooking right under his heel. I gable grip under my hand, tuck my hand towards my face and slightly rotate. If he doesn't rotate to relieve the pressure or tap, this could cause serious damage to his knee. Because of this, it's very important to be careful when training with heel hooks. The toe hold is a relatively secure submission, as well as one of the most versatile leg lock attacks. If I'm attacking my opponent's right leg, I'm going to use my left hand. Keeping my knees pinched tight, I'm going to slide my hand down to his toes. Using my own thigh as a fulcrum, I'm going to push his leg away, forcing his knee to bend. Keeping my thumb on top of his foot and facing the heel, I'm going to wrap my four fingers over his pinky toe. Keeping his knee bent, I'm going to plant my left elbow on the mat. Next, I sit up and reach around his ankle, and then grab my wrist with my free hand. I finish the submission by rotating his toes towards his butt and his heel towards my face. If you're having trouble controlling your opponent, you can move into a more dominant leg control position called the knot. Starting in a loose leg control, I'm going to grab a hold of my opponent's free ankle. I will then rock onto my back and use my bottom foot to elevate my opponent's free leg. As before, I'm going to take my top leg, lace it over the leg I'm attacking and under my opponent's free leg. The next couple steps have to happen all at the same time. Still holding onto my opponent's ankle, I'm going to bring my bottom knee towards my face, then over his free leg, then under my own ankle. Next, I let go of both legs, quickly sit up and grab his far knee. Pushing his shin with my chest, I force his knee to bend. Bringing my chin down to my own knee, I squeeze tightly. Once you have this mastered from the ground, and you're feeling slick, you can do this all in one move as you attack the leg initially. If I have my opponent under control with the leg knot, I can finish with a simple heel hook. But more often than not, your opponent will try very hard to get out of this position. I'm going to keep my knees pinched and hold on really tight as my opponent struggles and tries to straighten his legs. Eventually, he'll usually try to grab me to get out. Under these circumstances, I get to use my favorite submission, which we jokingly have been calling the love knot, but the name seems to have stuck. As my opponent starts to grab me, I grab back at him. I clench my hands behind his neck like a normal tie clench. Next, I pull his head in and straighten my legs to finish a very brutal submission. This primarily attacks his hip, but it can also do damage to his knee and his spinal cord. The best part about this submission is that if he fights really hard to get out of it, he'll put himself right back in the heel hook. If your opponent is smart, he'll realize the most important thing he needs to do to escape is get control of his own free leg. Once he digs out your top foot, you need to immediately rock onto your back and use your bottom foot to elevate his free leg to avoid him from standing. Once you get a chance, you're going to put that top leg back and under his knee pit and bring him back over to his side. If your opponent is still holding on to your outside foot, you can put it under his knee pit to break his grip, and then quickly bring it back over. This ability to quickly alternate between controlling his free leg with your top leg and then your bottom leg is extremely important to keep your opponent from standing or spinning. Just remember, all of his escapes require him to have a free leg. Because of this, it's priority number one not to lose it. If your opponent gets both your feet out from underneath his knee pit, you have a big problem. Before he can stand or escape, you have to act quickly. Quickly rotate your body outward. Using your free hand for stability, roll onto your forehead and your knees. Posting up on that hand, adjust your wrist and try to finish the ankle lock one-handed. If you need two hands, put your forehead back on the mat looking down at the knee, double up your grip, and thrust your hips in to finish the submission. Make sure you're not laying on your face or your chest, but balancing on your forehead. Otherwise, you're likely to lose control. You can also replace your shin on the back of his knee pit, grab his foot, and roll him back over into regular leg control. One of the most important parts of leg control is submission chaining. A good opponent might be able to escape out of your first submission attempt, but if you're quick, you can quickly link to a second or even third attack, hopefully catching your opponent off guard. Making sure my bottom foot is secure in my opponent's free leg's knee pit, I apply the heel hook. I might get the tap right here, but he also might try to roll away. Because my shin is against his knee pit, he can't fully escape, but he can relieve the pressure on his knee. Once his back is turned towards me, I'm going to transition to the toe hold. If done correctly, this should be the end of the fight. But if I lose control of his free leg, he'll be able to continue spinning. As he does, I'm going to roll onto my ribs, underhook his leg with my bottom arm, force his toes under my head, and grab his heel with my top hand. Squeezing my arms and knees together tightly, I rotate his heel towards the sky, his toes towards the mat, and thrust my hips in to finish the knee bar. There are many specific escapes to different submissions, but the first line of leg control defense is to simply stand up and to put weight on the foot your opponent is trying to attack. Once you do this, your opponent is tasked with the job of getting you back onto the floor. At the same time, they have to defend their own feet from counterattacks. I have to remember, as long as I'm putting weight on the foot he's trying to attack, my foot is safe. I can't be put in a toe hold, ankle lock, or heel hook as long as that heel is planted firmly on the ground. Because of this, standing is definitely one of my best options. As Mike sits back, I immediately pop up before he can get control of my free leg and put all my weight on the foot he's attacking. Next, I'm going to use both hands to pin his shin that's in between my legs and step back, freeing it for attack. I'll step back in and slide it underneath my armpit for my first counterattack, which will be the straight ankle lock. I can also shelf it over my thigh and counterattack with a toe hold, or I can pass the leg to the other side and finish with an inverted heel hook. If my opponent attempts to triangle his legs in defense, I can easily smash his knees down into his chest and pull my foot straight out. This brings us to an important point about leg control. If my opponent ever uses an outside leg triangle to finish a standard leg lock, I can easily escape because he has no control over my free leg. Here Mike tries to heel hook me, but I simply turn, post on his knee, and pull my foot straight out. If my opponent tries to transition from the leg triangle to having his ankles crossed and his hips high, I can also counterattack with a simple ankle lace. I reach my arm over his top foot and lace underneath the heel of his bottom foot. I then gable grip my hands together and pull my hands towards my face to finish the submission.